A lot of times we end up trying to rush forward into an activity rather than slowing things down and savoring a moment. So, for example, when's the last time that you felt your partner's breath on your skin? It is slowed down enough to really allow sensation to blossom and come to the forefront. So, today we're talking about what is possible if you stop performing intimacy and you start dropping into a full presence in your intimate life. Welcome to the Intimate Philosopher, where philosophy meets intimacy and life's biggest questions finally feel at home. I'm Dr. Emma Smith. I'm a licensed professional counselor, certified sex therapist, and existential philosophy nerd, inviting you to join me for an after hours conversation. This is a space to slow down, pour a glass of wine, or maybe a cup of tea, and explore the messy, beautiful intersections of meaning, connection, desire, and being fully human. This is the place for real conversations about the parts of life that don't fit neatly into a box. So, grab your glass, get comfy, and let's dive in. Hi, friends. I am so excited to invite you back to another episode of The Intimate Philosopher. Today, this might actually be one of my favorite episodes, and I hope I'm not saying that about every episode because I think this one is the real one, the real favorite. We'll see. So, today I want to talk to you about speed, and I also want to talk about desire, and of course, intimacy and sex and all of that good stuff. But we're going to start with speed because we move so fast in our current modern world that I think that we forget what it feels like to not just be physically touched by our partners, but to actually be touched by time. And I mean, to be fair, I think many of us invest time and money into not being touched by time, right? Like the youth aesthetics movement is a $1 billion industry for a reason. I think it's like 65 billion or something like that. I don't know. It's not even real numbers. It's wild. But I'm also talking less about that in this case and more about what happens or what the cost is when we rush from one thing to the next without taking those transition breaths, right? When we don't let our hand linger with our partner, or when we don't take a second to look someone in the eye, when we stop giving our partner a real kiss in the morning before they leave or when they get home, or even when we treat silence in a conversation as empty space that needs to be filled rather than its own experience in a conversation. And this is all relevant to desire because desire also doesn't live in speed. It is not something that tends to be nurtured in the fast lane. It is something that exists in between. It's in those gaps. And when we're looking at desire and maybe people who want to have more of an experience of desire in their relationships or even just with their own self, we're looking to slow things down so that you can notice things like temperature. Yeah, the physical temperature of the room, but also the emotional temperature of the relationship, the temperature of the conversation that you're having, or thinking about and feeling textures of things. Like when's the last time you paid attention to the texture of whatever it is that you're sitting on right now, if you're sitting, or the hardness of the floor? Did you know? Did you know this? Did you know that there's different floors and they have different experiences of hardness? I don't know if a lot of people do. Somebody pointed that out to me, and now I can't unnotice it. But there's this idea of different things that we can experience and interact with that, again, some of them are like textures and you can physically interact with them, but some of them are emotional or kind of in the ether, in this like aura realm where it's not something you can physically touch and it's something that you can feel deeply if you slow down enough to pay attention to it. So, when we're talking about slowing down timing, and when we're talking about in the bedroom particularly, I think that a lot of times we end up trying to rush forward into an activity rather than slowing things down and savoring a moment. So, for example, when's the last time that you felt your partner's breath on your skin? It's that moment where your awareness is brought in and it is slowed down enough to really allow sensation to blossom and come to the forefront. So, today we're talking about what is possible if you stop performing intimacy and you start dropping into a full presence in your intimate life. And I think about slowing down as an act of rebellion, actually, in a world that is pretty obsessed with acceleration. I mean, our nervous systems are constantly pulled, even, I mean, even like right now in particular, but also just in general, the pulled by screens, pulled by deadlines, and the pressure to do more, be more, produce more. But here's the thing. Intimacy doesn't respond to pressure, and it is much more receptive to permission giving. So when we slow down and we turn on our capacity to be where we are and to notice ourselves and our sensations and the people that we're with, and it's not just kind of in this archetypal formatting, it's really in the micro nuances of who they are and how they're showing up with us and who we get to be when we're with them. When we slow down and we notice the life that we're living and the one that we're building, that matters. And what we're going to be talking about in the slowing down, it's not about being lazy or complicit or pacified. It's actually about, I don't know, you could call it sensual intelligence. We've talked about erotic intelligence before, and now we're going to talk about sensual intelligence. So, in order to kick off this conversation on sensual intelligence, we really have to see that our body is our instrument of awareness. And I said earlier before the break that presence really is a foundation of pleasure, and you cannot feel turned on when your attention is being pulled in a bunch of different ways. Our bodies really do speak in a subtle language. Now, don't get it twisted. I know that it is possible to have sex while your head is out doing something else. Got it? I mean, you would be shocked to learn what people tell me they think about when they're distracted during sex. Everything from, writing a grocery list to painting teacups. So, our bodies, yeah, it is possible to go through the physical motions of, we'll call it multitasking. And if you're doing that and you're fine, and, I guess you don't have to change anything. But if you do want to do something different, or if you want to see, like, oh, what would it be like to be more present, then, you know, follow along. So, if we're going to go along with this idea that your body cannot feel turned on in the same way or to the same degree when your attention is scattered, then we kind of have to slow things down and think about the things that you might otherwise be missing. So, our bodies speak in really subtle language, in warmth, in tingling or pulsing, and even breath. Most of us have been conditioned to listen for fireworks, but our bodies will also send us really delightful messages in what would be more the volume of a whisper. And so when we miss these quiet moments, we're going to start missing moments where desire can actually start coming to life. And so when we talk about slowing down, it's not really about the slowness in terms of speed. It's about being able to tune in. And right now, even as you're listening, I want you to try a little mini exercise of tuning in. I want you to see, is your jaw clenched right now? And if it is, can you unclench it? Can you check your shoulders and maybe let them soften just a little bit more? And on your next breath, can you inhale just a little bit deeper? And can you notice how far into your torso your breath is able to go when you do inhale? And on your exhale, can you exhale fully so that your body has room to welcome in more clean, oxygenated air into your lungs? All of these things that I just talked about are forms of intimacy, intimacy with yourself. And what I'd like to invite you to consider now is that you're already inside it. These are little checks that you can do even by yourself. But imagine what would happen if you were able to do this with someone else and notice. Notice unclenching your jaw together. And when you're with your partner, letting your shoulders soften, maybe relaxing into that person or letting them fully relax into you. This is not a locked door. This is a room. And it's a room that many of us tend not to go in very often, but it's already inside you. We don't have to build another part of the house. More than likely, it is just a room that has been closed off for a while. In fact, as I'm thinking about this, the image that comes to mind is one of those really fancy rooms. Like when I was growing up, my, little friend down the street, her parents had this really, it felt like a very large house at the time. And her mom had this room. It didn't have any doors on it, actually, but it was one of those front living rooms where you weren't allowed to go in it. It was just for show. And if I think back now, it's almost as if this room was frozen in time. Like it was always perfectly set for something, but that something never quite came through to fruition. So this is kind of about going and sitting in that really lovely room and letting it be lived in a little bit? Maybe you still take your shoes off before you walk on the carpet. I don't know. But when we talk about desire, I think we need to talk about some myths as well. And so that's where I want to dive into next. And we're going to start with the myth of spontaneous desire. Okay. It's not a myth entirely, but there is kind of a mythic quality to it that I think deserves our attention. So here's my best shot at it. I think many of us are taught to believe that desire should arrive like lightning, that it's sudden and dramatic and unmistakable. And one of the reasons that we're taught that is because that is primarily how men experience desire. But that is not how most women experience desire. And while we're at it, it's not the only way that men can experience desire either. In fact, as men get older, one of the things that happens is that they start coming in being like, I can't, I'm having erectile dysfunction issues. And one of the things that happens is that they're coming in thinking that it's a desire issue because they may have lost spontaneous desire. But and I have to say this, like a lot of urologists are actually the ones who send me my clients because of this very thing, because a lot of the time there isn't actually a physiological component. And it's really important, by the way, I want to side note this. It is really important that if you are a penis owner or you love someone with a penis, it's important to know that if it's not working, and again, I learned this from urologists, it can actually be a sign of a more serious medical condition, right? So you do want to go get that checked out because I think it has to do with like cardiovascular response. And, you get it, erections, blood flow, etc. That said, so much of ED has to do with what's going on in the brain. And a lot of men, because they didn't have to learn, they didn't have to learn how to nurture their desire. It was either there or it wasn't. And If you have ever talked to anybody who has been on testosterone supplementation or HRT, apparently T is a hell of a drug. Okay. So when we're talking about this, yeah, spontaneous desire is a thing. And for people of all genders, especially as they get older, it starts to fade. So we probably need to talk about this other kind of desire. And this is the one that can be cultivated, and it's also a slower burn. It's about blowing on embers, not striking a match. Okay. And for this one in particular, especially for women, our arousal doesn't tend to be about novelty as much as it tends to be about spaciousness and permission. So, the body opens like a flower, right? And the body opens in rhythm with things like trust and space, not pressure. And so when we slow down, we can actually give desire a chance to fully arrive on scene. It's really interesting because I think when I talk about presence, people are like, "Oh, that's such a cute little existential topic." And I'm like, "Bullshit. Presence is foreplay." Okay? Presence is foreplay that never ends. So that's how I want you to think about being present in your relationship. It is foreplay. Okay? So, all joking aside, I want to slow down for a moment because this is where a lot of people quietly decide that something is wrong with them. We've talked about spontaneous desire as this kind of lightning bolt of wanting that arrives out of nowhere. And yes, that is real. And some people experience it frequently, and many people experience it less as they age. And for a lot of people, especially women, it never really was the primary way that desire showed up to begin with. But here's where I want to be really careful because there's this myth about this other kind of desire. And this other kind of desire is called responsive desire. And that myth causes just as much harm as the myth of spontaneity. And that myth sounds like this: if my desire is responsive, then I'm supposed to just wait. I'm supposed to wait for my body to feel something. I'm supposed to wait to be turned on. I'm supposed to wait until it magically arrives. And that's not how responsive desire works. Responsive desire is not passive and it's not inert. It's it's not you just sitting around hoping your body cooperates. Responsive desire is contextual. It responds to context and conditions. Think of it less as a light switch and more like a dimmer. Or even better, like a nervous system that is asking a question. Is it safe enough? Is there enough space? Do I have enough time? Am I allowed to be here? And for many people, desire doesn't show up before engagement. It shows up because of engagement, not because something is done to you, but because you are participating in shaping the conditions in which desire can emerge. And this is where I want to slow the conversation down because, and this is really important, responsive desire still has agency. What do I mean by that? If you have responsive desire, your role isn't to wait for something. Your role is to notice what shuts desire down, or as Emily Nagoski would say, hits the brakes. Things like feeling pressure, feeling like you're going to be evaluated, being rushed, being watched, unless that's your thing, right? Feeling like there's an outcome that you're supposed to produce. This is something that Rollo May called the tyranny of the orgasm. And it used to be that people were evaluated on whether or not they were willing to engage in sex with a partner at all, premarital, of course. And now it's about being evaluated on whether or not you can orgasm. Like, what a trip. We traded one pass fail test for another. No, not that. Our job is to notice. So noticing what gently opens things up, not even sexually necessarily, but sensorially, right? So sometimes it's emotional safety. Sometimes it is anticipation. Sometimes it is novelty. Sometimes it's familiarity. And sometimes it's simply having enough time to not be on the clock or to have enough energy, reserved that hasn't been siphoned off by, oh, I don't know, the world. And it's about, just making space for that and noticing that. Desire for a lot of people, it doesn't respond to direct stimulation, or at least this kind of desire doesn't respond necessarily to direct stimulation. It responds to meaning and context and permission. And when that context is there, the desire doesn't have to be forced, it unfolds. So please understand that responsive desire is not a sign of brokenness. It's a tool of discernment. It's the body that says, hey, show me the environment, and then I will show you how I'm feeling. Right. And that means that you're not powerless in this process. You are allowed to collaborate with your desire and your partner. You are allowed to set the stage. You are allowed to shape the conditions, which brings us to something I want to do together now. Not to turn you on or make anything happen, but to help you feel what responsive desire actually responds to. Okay, so wherever you are right now, I'm not asking you to change your position. Just let your body be how it is. Okay. And I'm not asking you to feel anything in particular. Just notice. Right. I want you to take one breath. Okay. And then I want you to take on your next one, I want you to take one that is just a little slower than the last one. And then let it go. And now I want you to think about a moment, not necessarily a sexual one, but one where you felt more open, more alive, and more available mentally, emotionally, physically. This could have been with another person, or it could have been completely alone. It could have been something very small. And as you think about that moment, I don't want you to replay the action, but I do want you to notice the conditions, right? Was there time? Was there privacy? Was there a sense of ease? Was there laughter? Was there quiet? Right. And then I want you to notice what was not present. Probably no pressure, probably no performance, no one needing anything from you. Just stay with that for a few seconds. And now, very gently, I want you to notice what happens in your body when you notice that context. You don't have to label it as desire. You don't even have to label it at all. Just notice. Does anything soften? Does anything warm? Does your breath change? Even just a little bit, right? That's responsiveness. That is responsiveness, not because something sexual happened, but because your body recognized a condition where it didn't have to brace. Okay. All right. While we're here, take one more slow breath. Okay. Tell yourself good job and let yourself come back. Right. Nothing to fix, nothing to make happen. It's just information. Okay. I want to share a clinical moment that comes up more often than you might expect, especially in kind of the context of this conversation. And like all of my examples, I'm going to frame this as one couple who came in for the sake of storytelling, but please know that this is generalized and kind of a conglomerate of a bunch of people over the years. So, this couple comes in and they're in a long term relationship. There is a lot of care between them. They love one another. And the reason that they came in is because we had been talking about how the female partner was experiencing diminished sexual desire. And at some point in the conversation, the term responsive desire came up, and the male partner immediately said, I can't stand that term and I think it's bullshit. And I was like, oof, okay, well, that's a statement. And to be honest with you, I mean, again, this is not the first time I've heard this. And I've heard it from other male partners too, and usually with a lot of frustration underneath. And I think what they're reacting to is this idea that responsive desire turns them into some kind of creeper. Like their role is to try and hope and risk rejection over and over again. Like they're supposed to initiate while their partner just, waits to see if her body responds. And when you frame it that way, like, yeah, that sounds terrible. Who would want to be in that, and who wouldn't feel disempowered in that dynamic? But there was more happening in the room than just frustration. Okay. I don't think we talk about this enough, particularly with responsive desire versus spontaneous desire, this whole conversation. The thing that was lurking in the subtext of that conversation was culture, because many of us, especially those of us who were raised in purity culture, were taught a very specific story about women and desire. And it is damaging to all parties in a relationship. That story is that it is not good for women to want sexually, that wanting is dangerous, that it makes women impulsive and untrustworthy or shameful, that good women don't want. Good women respond, they wait. So, even when we introduce a concept like responsive desire, I think it can accidentally land inside that old conditioning. And it can sound like, she's not supposed to want. She's supposed to be chosen. She's not supposed to do anything to prime her desire. And, if you do anything to prime your desire, that's being sexually aggressive and that's bad. What man would want that? Let me tell you, a lot of men would want that actually. But for the sake of our story, what man would want that in a very negative connotation? And that's the frame. And then this is where the responsibility automatically shifts. Because then on the flip side, we have, okay, well, men have to be the ones who initiate, men have to be the ones who risk rejection. And if they're decent guys who give a shit about their partners, right? I think that men try to read the room without being too much. I think that men often feel responsible. How do I know this? Because they come in and they freaking tell me that they feel this way. And they can feel responsible for whether desire happens at all. And then women end up in a different bind because if you've been taught that wanting is suspect, then doing anything to cue your own desire can feel wrong. It can feel like cheating. It can feel like manipulating the outcome, like you're not supposed to touch your own wanting until it arrives on its own as facilitated by your presumably male partner. And so then responsive desire in particular becomes this something that happens to women and not something that they're allowed to participate in, let alone ignite. And this belief ends up reinforcing a dynamic where men feel responsible and women feel passive or disempowered from their own wanting, even when neither of them actually wants that arrangement or even agrees with the premise of that arrangement. And I think that that's actually what was happening with this couple. Not because responsive desire is inherently disempowering, but because it has been so misunderstood. Responsive desire doesn't mean, oh, yeah, I'll wait on the sidelines and see if you do enough, right? It means my body responds to context, and I am responsible for participating in and creating that context too. And I think that's the part that often gets missed. Responsive desire still has agency, it just expresses agency earlier because it's going to come in the form of what gets attention, what's the pacing of my day, what is the context of the environment, monitoring my emotional availability. And I think, choosing to stay forward and present rather than being like braced to receive and being caught on your heels. So the interesting thing is that when we slowed that conversation down and we actually were able to name that cultural conditioning, something really shifted for that couple. And not because anyone was wrong or doing it wrong or actually needed fixing. It's because the responsibility for the success of that aspect of the relationship was redistributed in a much more equitable way. I think that for my male client, he was able to stop feeling like he was being, borderline creepy by chasing this experience. And for the female client, like, I think that she stopped feeling like her body and, whether or not it responded was being evaluated. And desire stopped being something that one person was solely responsible for producing or introducing, and that, the other one had to approve or disapprove of it, right? Of course, this means that you have to also commit to not being judgy of your partner as well. Trying something new is vulnerable and scary, and so many partners stay frozen in old patterns that aren't working for them because they are more terrified of being judged by their partner than of not having good sex. And that's true for men, women, and anyone else. It became something, I think for this couple in particular, it became something that, you know, people can orient toward together. You can set the tempo and the conditions of different experiences too. It's not like we're always going to be wanting the same kind of thing either. So there's got to be some nuance. Sometimes you want something that is wild and new and novel and intriguing, and sometimes you want something that is slow and deep and familiar and yummy in a completely different way. So just remember, like, when you can do this together, when you can orient towards one another and towards this shared experience of the relationship together, that room, not the physical room, but like the room where you occupy intimacy in your relationship really does shift into something that can be truly beautiful, meaningful, and good for everyone involved. And this is where presence really starts to matter because once that responsibility is shared and once desire is no longer something that one person has to produce and the other person has to approve, the question itself actually changes. It stops being, how do we make desire happen? And it becomes something more like, oh, I don't know, can we actually be here together long enough to notice what happens? Presence is what makes responsive desire possible without pressure. And not presence as a concept as much as presence as a pace. Presence is what allows you to stay with a sensation instead of rushing towards an outcome. And it's what lets you notice a moment before your desire actually has a name. Thinking about that warmth of arousal that starts to peak wanting, a soft yes that can arrive as a nod towards exploring what might be possible on any given day. And when people struggle with desire, it's less about their bodies not knowing how to feel and more about their attention being split, I think, being pulled towards performance, being pulled towards expectation, being pulled towards answering the question of, is it working yet? Right? Nobody likes that question. No one ever likes that question. Presence removes that question. Okay. It creates enough space for your nervous system to stop bracing. It creates enough space for you to start listening both to your own body and to your partner's. And when your body feels listened to, it responds. And it's not going to respond on a schedule and it's not going to respond on demand, but in its own time. And so when we talk about slowing down, this is what we're talking about. It's not necessarily about doing less, but rather being here in whatever moment I am more fully. Because desire actually doesn't need to be chased, it needs room. And here's the other thing, too. Slowing down in love and in life, that's not just for the bedroom. Okay. So, how we reclaim intimacy everywhere is actually important. And so, I'll go back to some of my favorite examples. It's in the way that you sip your coffee or your red wine, as it were. It's in the way that you can listen to somebody without rehearsing your response. Maybe the next time you're talking to somebody, you can linger 3 seconds longer in their gaze, right? Slowness and slowing down, it really allows something special to occur. And honestly, that's a reintroduction of an experience of awe, AWE, right? And awe is a gateway to experiencing desire because when you're truly present, I believe that almost everything can become erotic. And maybe sensual is actually the right word. It's not really in a sexual sense, but in this sense of being fully alive and immersed. And when you're present, I think the world starts to touch you back. It's not just about you superimposing yourself on the world, it's about meeting it in this dialogue and letting the world touch you back. So let's talk about maybe adding in a little bit of an exercise for us to kind of wrap up on today. And I'll make sure that each of the exercises that we did is time stamped for you so that you can come back and think about this sensual tempo of life. Sometimes I think that maybe being turned on isn't about more stimulation, but rather more attention. And maybe the way that pleasure isn't necessarily a place that we arrive, but it's a pace. It's a pace that we get to choose. And the slower you move through a moment, the more you can feel. And the more that you feel, I think the more you can belong to yourself. And the more you can give of yourself in your relationships and give, I think, yourself the best experience of that relationship. And for those of you who might need to hear me say it again, okay, slowness and slowing down is not laziness. Did you hear me? Slowness and slowing down is not laziness. This is you tapping into your sensual intelligence. Your body already knows this tempo, by the way. I truly believe that. I think that it's really been waiting for you to allow it the space where it gets to listen and it gets to respond to you. When we talk about being in a relationship with ourselves and we kind of, have really cheapened the idea of self care into this thing that's like, go to the spa, go get a massage, like those types of things, which it's lovely, but that's not really relational self care. But talking about being in a relationship with ourselves where we get to be curious, you know? So, okay, well, one more thing. If you want to try something this week, and this is truly optional, again, everything here is optional. I want to offer this small way where you can work on responsive desire without trying to make anything happen. Okay. Again, not foreplay. It's not an assignment and it's not about turning yourself on. It's about gathering information once a day, maybe even just once this week. Take a moment to notice what helps your body soften and what makes it brace. That's it. You don't have to change anything. You don't have to act on what you notice. I just want you to pay attention. Notice moments when you feel more at ease, maybe when you're not being watched, when there's no time pressure, when you feel emotionally connected, or maybe even when you have privacy. Or even like more kind of stripped down than that, notice moments where you're simply not in your own head. And then also notice the opposite, notice the times when you are absolutely in your own head, when your jaw is tight, when your breath gets shallow, when you feel evaluated, when your body goes quiet. Again, none of that is wrong. That's just your nervous system giving you data. And I think also, like, if you're in a relationship, you can even name this out loud, not really as a request or a criticism, but just as information. Something like, I notice I feel more open when we're not rushing, or I notice my body shuts down when I feel pressure. No fixing, no negotiating, just noticing together. And if you're single, this practice still matters because responsive desire doesn't start with another person. It starts with knowing the conditions under which you and your body come alive, right? So this isn't about learning how to want more, it's about learning how to listen. And once your body feels listened to, guess what? It already knows what to do. So just get out of the way and let it, right? Thank you so much for sharing this time with me, and I hope that this episode resonated with you, and I will see you next time. Thank you so much for joining me for this after hours conversation. If something in today's episode made you pause, get curious, or see yourself a little more clearly, share it with a friend and keep that conversation going. Until next time, keep exploring that messy, beautiful space between meaning and being human. I'll see you next time.